All right. Hello, everybody. This is Bill Harris. We're going to get started now. Ken Wilber is on the line with me here. And if you can wake yourself up after that music, we'll get started. I don't know who chose that music. Actually, I do know who chose it. My web guy chose it.
Well, that was music for the angelic clouds. It was.
That's right. That's right. Well, how are you doing, Ken?
Well, fine, my friend. Good to hear your voice. Good to talk with you. This is going to be a fun evening.
I think this is going to be really amazing for people because some really powerful, potent stuff is happening in the world today, and you seem to be in the center of a whole lot of it. And I'm really grateful that I know you, and that I get to be sometimes, in some ways, part of it. So.
Great.
Let's just dive right into it. We're going to talk about integral life practice.
Right.
So, why don't you kind of start off and tell people what that is and, why it's important and why anybody should care?
Sure. Well, we can start by simply pointing out that if you're getting into anything in terms of practice, it can be an integral transformative practice. It can just be a spiritual practice. It can be something like Tony Robbins in terms of just changing your life. Tony, incidentally, has worked with us on this. Tony is on our board of directors, as are dozens of other teachers that we'll get to in a moment. But what we found basically is it's not that there's a shortage of practices, spiritual practices or transformative practices to increase your work performance or your life happiness or your relationships or any of that. It's the opposite. We have an embarrassment of riches. Esalen Institute cataloged from all over the world the number of practices that claim to be transformative and that seem to be fairly legitimate. And they stopped cataloging it somewhere at around 20,000 practices.
Yes.
So you've got 20,000 practices, and it's like good luck. It's just this overwhelming smorgasbord.
I only have time to do about 12,000 of them a day myself.
That's right. The first 8,000 are the hardest.
Yes.
So what we did two things. One, we wanted to find just a simple framework that would explain them all. There was actually a place for all of them, and we felt that if putting all of these scholars together, if we really put our minds to it, we could come up with a way that would just let you understand everything that's out there. A place for everything, in other words, and in a very simple framework.
Yeah,
and that's what we call.
There's probably not a person listening who has not experienced a certain amount of overwhelm about which practice should I do. How do I do it correctly?
Right.
How do I know if it's working? And what are the right instructions?
Exactly.
I mean, just to name a few of the possible questions you could have about them.
Well, and that's what we were dealing with. And also, I mean, first of all, we were trying to do it almost like, just out of curiosity, but also because we wanted to practice it. We've been doing this. Most of the teachers that we've worked with, well, they're the leaders in their field. There's no question. We have the finest contemplative and spiritual teachers anywhere on the planet working on this. And it's the result of their personal work over the past 30 and 40 and even 50 years in some cases. But we got this framework, and I'll be talking about that. We're all very happy with that. It's been tried and tested, and you'll see that the framework is just a simple way to hold all of these practices so you know what they're doing, and you can start to make some order out of it. But the second thing that we wanted to do was, okay, now that we have this integral framework, a way to make sense of everything, a way to hold it in place, a way to index it, if you will. Now let's go ahead and go through all of these practices, and let's see which ones work. Let's really just shake it down and distill it based, again, on dozens and dozens of the world's finest teachers and their experience in trying pretty much all of those 20,000 practices were tried by some of these people one time or another. And so we put all our notes together and came up with what we consider to be gold star practices in each of what we call modules. And some of the modules will sound similar or familiar to people. Modules like body and mind and spirit and shadow work. But we found that there were certain practices in each of those modules that worked really, really well, and others that didn't work so well. So the second thing we wanted to do was actually come up with practices that work, shake them down to those that are most essential, most effective, and in some cases create entirely new practices based on what we had learned. And so ways we could really, really streamline this. And you know the results of some of these, how working with, just to give one example, Big Mind process, which is Genpo Roshi's contribution and is part of a spirit module, how you literally can get very, very advanced states of Zen meditation in a few hours.
Yeah, mind-blowing.
And I know it sounds insane, but it ordinarily would take a decade or more to get into. And I've practiced Zen for 30 years. I know what I'm talking about. I've seen it happen. It's unbelievable. So it's that kind of stuff.
Yes, it's amazing. And, you know, actually that's a good example of the way that Integral Life Practice has integrated things from East and West, too. And we probably not time yet to get into Big Mind itself. But, you know, some practices, some people are so into Eastern practices that they discount Western practices. And
right.
There are some people the other way, too.
Right.
You know, what we're interested in here is what really works.
Yeah.
Not whether it's a matter, you know, from this tradition or that tradition, or Swami so-and-so said this or that. It's what
right.
works. And there's a lot of good stuff from the West, too.
Well, and that's important because it's one of the tendencies over the past 30 years is that on the one hand, we were really graced to have access to basically all the cultures world over. This has never happened before. There's never been a time in history when individuals literally had access to every main known culture on the planet. And that's how we got these 20,000 transformative practices, is by actually accessing all of the world's cultures and their spiritual practices and seeing what is there. But there did tend to be this sort of tendency to say, well, if I'm practicing an Eastern practice, I think that it's a complete path, and I'm somehow saying something bad about my path if I even think that something like maybe psychotherapy could help it. And that's just not a really good way to think in terms of how to put these things together. And it's even though a lot of people tried it, what we found was very simple. We had 30 or 40 years of people meditating, and we found what worked and what didn't work. And what didn't work, one of the things that didn't work, meditation doesn't necessarily help you uncover deep, repressed, shadow, psychological elements. It's very good at transcending the ego, but it's not very good at finding the shadow elements of that ego. So we thought that was so important that in the usual combination that you might hear of working on body, mind, and spirit, we added one of the fundamental modules in addition to those was shadow. And one of the things that I think is exciting about shadow is it's one of the other areas that we found a way to actually get an enormous amount of very rich psychological work done in a very quick, very fast amount of time by using a technique that goes right to the heart of the matter, and we call it the 3-2-1 process. And we can talk about that at some point if you want, but it's just another example of finding the best transformative practices in each of these modules.
Yeah, one of the things I've really been impressed with as I have used this kit myself that you've created over the last, 6 months or however long it's been,
last year
is how potent and quick a lot of these practices are. You've really distilled the essence and found ways to accelerate this. And it's really quite remarkable that you've been able to do this. That's partly because of the cast of characters you've been working with.
Yeah, we've got the A team, and these are people that basically just kind of became each other's friends over the years. But what happens when really great mystics, great contemplatives get together, whether they're from Hinduism or Buddhism or Taoism or Christianity or Judaism, Hasidim, and so on, is they start to find and recognize similarities, deepest parts of their own paths. So that's unlike, let's say, fundamentalists, and I don't really necessarily mean to be picking on them, but if you're a fundamentalist, you think you've got the only way. And whether you're a fundamentalist Krishna follower or a fundamentalist Allah follower or a fundamentalist Southern Baptist. You've got the one and only way, and everybody else is going to spend a lot of time in hell.
Well, and obviously one of the things about seeing things in an integral way is that you begin to notice the similarities between lots of different practices in different cultures, and how they're the same, and how some of them have a little nuance here or a little nuance there that might be better than the way it's being done in another culture. And so you can take the best of the best and refine it. I think that's one of your contributions, really, to the whole world of philosophy and spiritual practice, is that you have spent all this time to look at all these various things, along with a lot of other people you've been working with, and have put them together in a way that, I mean, really, I think that what has come out of this is a level of ability to practice and accelerate your practice that has never existed in the world until now. I mean, it's that good.
I'm very suspicious of kind of exaggerated claims and stuff. I actually wrote a whole book about it, but I don't know any other way to accurately describe what's happening in some cases except exactly the way you described it. And I'll give you a quick example of how we are arriving at some of these in terms of just the spiritual module itself. And again, we have a body module, and we have a mind module, and we have shadow work. But in the spirit module, we took these 20 or 30 really finest contemplative, meditative, spiritual teachers in the world, people like Father Thomas Keating and Rabbi Zalman and Dave Beta and representatives from literally every major tradition. And instead of just having a conference, where people get up and wonderfully sort of give their approach and explain it, we did something different. We basically put them all together in a room for a weekend and locked the doors. And then we took turns with each teacher saying, you have 6 hours to enlighten everybody else in this room. Go. In other words, the teachers were teaching the teachers. It wasn't just everybody giving papers and talks, all that. It was serious work about transforming. Now, these people were already deeply enlightened in many ways, deeply realized people, but they found by the end of the second day that things were happening that were so extraordinary. I remember Jimbo Roshi called home and talked to his wife and said, this is the single most extraordinary experience of my entire life. Now,
and
these
he's had
people
a
have been
few
around
others.
the block a few times, so that was something. Now, we distilled that kind of stuff is what we've distilled and made available, because it turns out it is teachable. You can learn it. And we put that in the spirit module. So we have some other things we'll talk about, I'm sure, in the body module, stuff in the mind module. That was an example of some of the stuff in the spirit module, and then some of the stuff in the shadow, or working with your unconscious. So those are the 4 fundamental modules, and they're scalable. In each of the modules, there are dozens of different practices that you can use. Some people are already practicing something, and you can bring that to your integral practice. If you're already doing yoga, or already doing Christian contemplative prayer, or already doing holosync, fantastic. That's something you can just bring. You can also check out some of these other practices that we've included. So it's very mix and match, and some of it can be done really quite quickly. We actually have things called 1-minute modules, where we've really distilled it down, and you can get a flavor of the basic transformative practices in doing a quick minute kind of review of them. And so we have several of those as well.
And you don't have to pick just one either, because I use holosync, obviously, but I think Big Mind is well, and you and I have talked about this. We both thought that this is one of the biggest breakthroughs in Buddhism in the last couple hundred years.
I have no doubt.
I'm not just doing one thing in each module. A person can do one or more.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's entirely up to your time and how much you want to do it. And we don't want people to think that what you're doing with an integral practice is just loading yourself down with tons and tons and tons of stuff. It actually doesn't work that way. What happens is, as you get into the practice and see how it works, you find usually 1 or sometimes 2 of these approaches that really talk to you, that really resonate with you deeply. And because they're so effective, I mean, we just chose the best of the best practices. It's something that actually is very easy to carry. And the fundamental approach of this, if you look at the Spirit module, most of the great contemplative traditions, East and West, describe one of the results of meditation. Sometimes they use a strong word like bliss, but another good word is just happiness. And what happens when you do this is you just kind of are carrying this practice with a happiness, a fundamental primordial happiness that comes out of contacting your own big mind or your own ever-present spirit or ever-present awareness. And, of course, we have simple practices for that. And if you want, you can practice them 5 hours a day. I mean, there's no reason you can't do that. But we also have very, very effective practices that you can do in 10 or 15 minutes.
Well, Ken, explain what you found about the benefits of doing something in each of these areas rather than just one or two, because I think that's an important aspect of this and an important discovery.
Yeah, I think it probably is the whole foundation of the entire integral approach. And this is something that we all kind of knew intuitively over the years, but then there's been more actual empirical research on it. And really what it comes down to is that if you want to increase your capacity to grow and develop and transform, and whether you're doing this in a kind of mastery process for because you want to really be more successful at work, or whether you're doing it for more typically traditionally spiritual approaches where you want to awaken to your own primordial, already free self and awaken to your always already present big mind. Any of those are fine. What we found is that there are a certain minimum number of components, and you have to cross-train them. If you don't train body and mind and spirit and shadow, and then we have a few auxiliary things we'll talk about in a moment, but these core modules, if you don't do them all together, none of them stick. And that's the key. That's what was so shocking. And again, though, when you think about it, it does make sense. But if you are doing just one module, if you're just trying to have a spiritual realization, for example, or the other way, if you're just trying to do bodily workouts, if you don't include the other modules, you're not going to get very far. And it's not that including the other modules takes longer. The joke is it takes shorter. And the reason is, I'll give a quick example because we have an empirical study on this. People that do meditation, a particular type of meditation that was used in this study is Buddhist insight meditation. And you divide it into several groups. One group does just meditation. One group does meditation and a certain amount of weightlifting. And you don't tell the teachers which of the students are doing which, but you have the teachers, meditation teachers, grade the progress of the students. Those who meditate, in other words, and lift weights, score higher on meditation scores than those that don't lift weights. And so the point is that, again, exercising, cross-training these two modules makes you learn faster in each of them and ends up taking less time. And so sometimes people would say, well, I don't have time to do everything that you're talking about. And I say, I don't have time not to. This is the shortest, simplest path you can take to wake up and actually make it stick, make it stay. You have to lay a foundation in all of these core modules, or the advance you make in one could be, wonderful and a wonderful peak experience and a blazing sort of realization or understanding, and it will fade.
Well, and
it simply will fade.
Another comment about this idea of how much time someone is allotting to this or that.
Yeah.
What people are doing with the rest of their time that causes them to say, I don't have enough time. If you really dig into it, their reason for doing those things is because they assume that if they do enough of those things, that they'll feel happier or more peaceful or more fulfilled. Right. And the point is that these practices have been proven to get you to that place. Not in just a spiritual way, but also in a worldly way on the relative plane. And so why not do the things that have been proven to work rather than scurrying around thinking that if you make more sales or whatever, that's
right.
going to be the secret, or if you have more girlfriends or whatever it is.
Yeah, we just weren't interested in practices that didn't have a lot of evidence. And some of them actually have strict scientific type of evidence. I'll give you one real quick, only because it's so important. One of the important things that Western psychologists have brought to the table is the fact that men and women, as they grow and learn, they develop, they evolve. And development occurs through stages, whether it's going from a zygote to a human or an acorn to an oak. And you can basically map out these stages of development and help people orient to their own growth and development if they have a little map of the territory that they're going to be traversing. Now, if you take almost any of those psychological maps, mapping the terrain and the stages that people go when they develop through moral development or interpersonal development or cognitive development, and you have them meditate, what we find is that you can't skip those stages, but meditation dramatically accelerates your movement through them. And we've got several dozen studies on that done by very reputable scientists using meditation and a very sophisticated scale of development called the Jane Loevinger scale of self-development. Mm-hmm. And that turns out to be something that is probably one of the most important things that meditation does. First of all, or spiritual practice of the type that we introduced, just fundamental core awareness training. When you do that, you get two things. One is you get an awareness of this already unbounded, free, pure presence, radically open, radically liberated self. And this fundamental sense of I amness, of course, is a profound way to look at spirit or Godhead and to actually experience Godhead as your own purest self or big mind. And that is one of the things that, of course, meditation can help you do. But the other is every time you have that realization or experience, it's acting as a micro-transformative pull on the other lines of development. So you're actually accelerating other types of development when you do spiritual work. And that's a profound discovery that over the last 10 years. So we've incorporated that. That's part of what the cross-training is all about. If you train body and mind and spirit and shadow, they all work better, faster. And if you don't do them all together, they don't stick. A fundamental problem.
So if anybody listening here has been developing more slowly than you'd like, which probably is almost everyone, this is a really revolutionary solution to that, because if you do it this way, you'll immediately begin to notice a pretty dramatic acceleration.
And you get traction. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's, of course, what we were looking for. Too many cases, people would practice a really good practice. I mean, it has just a lot of, sometimes thousands of years behind it. And in some ways it was working fine, but people just weren't progressing as fast as they felt they could, and certainly we felt they could. In some cases it was us. The teachers themselves, when they were first starting, were wondering why some of these practices couldn't be accelerated. And one of the answers turns out to be this cross-training. As you train in these other areas, consciousness itself tends to grow and develop across the board. And most of these other things, obviously some of them can be difficult, and you have to face that fact squarely. You can't merely wish your way into this. You do have to exercise a muscle alongside of perhaps having affirmations and visualizations about it getting larger. But if you want to get a muscle larger, you got to pump iron. But that working with shadow, working with spirit, working with mind, there's also a part of them that actually generates a radiant joy, because every time you do it, there's just a greater degree of freedom, and you can feel that. And it's with the also added gratification of knowing that this is a practice that's really been tested, not only by time, but by essentially the world's really most respected meditation teachers. So you know that if you're starting to feel particularly good or happy, you know it's not merely some sort of wish fulfillment or some sort of loopy altered state you've gotten yourself into, because this has been checked against the finest authorities in the field anywhere. And that's always a comfort.
When you get positive reinforcement from whatever practice you are, it makes it easier to keep going. I mean, because a lot of people get discouraged and stop, and I've talked to many people who meditated for a few years and then they stopped and didn't meditate for a few years, and it's because they're not getting the reinforcement that tells them this is worth my time. When you accelerate it in this way, you get that reinforcement much more powerfully, and so you tend to keep going and enjoy doing it every day.
Yeah, and again, because this is customizable, some people really are comfortable with sitting down and doing more traditional practices, whether those practices are just their own awareness training, or whether it might be Christian contemplative, it might be yoga, it might be very intensive Zen practice. All of that's fine. If that's what you're doing, you can bring that to your practice. That's part of your integral practice. Many people, as I said, are already doing something in one of these modules. So that's fine. And you can keep the practice you have if it's working. But frankly, some people just don't have quite that superhuman will to, spend 10 years on a meditation mat. And so there are a couple of things that obviously make it easier for them. They can be used as part of your integral practice. One of them, of course, is holosync tapes.
Yep, I'm all for that.
We all for that, and that can introduce you into profound theta and delta states, and the integral map actually predicts that those would be effective, because they are affecting part of the dimensions that are covered by the integral map itself, and it's a fine product, and you can use those. Big Mind itself, certainly part of it is just virtually effortless. What you are doing, within an hour or so, and it's included on, just so people know if they're worried about it, the kit that we have has a lot of things in it, which we'll tell you about, but it does have 5 DVDs. And on several of those, you'll find Genpo Roshi doing an entire process of Big Mind. So you get a complete introduction to it, a complete initiation. 99 out of 100 people watch these things and have a direct satori, a direct awakening to their big mind. I've never seen it fail myself personally. I've heard of 1 or 2 occasional ones that don't work, but it's effective almost all the time. People will come away from that. That's part of your grounding and part of the fundamental basic goodness and basic sanity and basic happiness.
Well, and for a lot of people, this is a big mind. What we're calling big mind is just something they've read about, and it seems unattainable. And you go through this process, and you have that experience, and it's so immediate. And I've seen people come in off the street to be with Genpo, and they don't know anything about this. And 2 hours later, they are saying things from their experience in that moment that the Buddha said. It's absolutely amazing.
And I know this fairly well, again, because I've studied and practiced Zen for many years, and Zen has a very profound technique of meditation called the Cohen system, and those are very difficult questions usually that the rational mind can't answer, but your present awareness, your present feeling awareness can answer it. And so koans are ways to basically discover your own big mind, and big mind will very easily answer the question, no matter how kind of silly it seems. Koans are things like drink the Pacific Ocean in a single gulp. And there's a way to do that, and it makes absolute sense, no matter how crazy it sounds. And like you, I've seen people come in off the street, not knowing even what Buddhism was, and 2-3 hours later are answering these koans. And it's really shocking, and it's amazing. So we use that as a foundation. I want to emphasize again that if you're doing any spiritual practice, it could be, again, Christian practice or Vedanta or Taoism, you can do that. That's fine. We just include default practices in all of the modules in case you don't have one. And then we, of course, point to dozens of others that you can take up if you want to. So you don't just have to do weightlifting. You can do all sorts of different types of physical work, from Pilates to Hatha yoga to et cetera.
Yeah.
So that's just part of creating an entire package that you can use. And then all of a sudden, you're hitting on all 8 cylinders. Your body starts to hum, and things start to fall in place and actually make sense of what's going on. And that's probably one of the most important things I think people get from this, is a sense of understanding about how all of these things fit together.
Let's talk about one more thing before we actually go through the 4 modules that I think is also important, and that is the clarity of the instructions. A lot of these practices are really no longer, but they, up to very lately, they've been esoteric. And I know myself, trying to figure out how to practice some of these things, if you don't have a teacher to clarify it for, and sometimes in some traditions the teacher is purposely not clear. But
that's right.
At any rate, you know, a lot of people, they wonder, am I doing it right? What's supposed to happen? And so on.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the clarity of the instructions for these practices.
Well, I think that's probably the key to them. Because, again, what we're trying to do here, and actually increasingly with the blessings of the lineage holders and teachers themselves, part of what happened at the beginning, 30 or 40 years ago, is that the contemplative teachers, now most of them were from the East, but we should remember that the West does have a very great contemplative tradition. It doesn't get much of the headlines because the fundamentalist sort of dogmatic approach tends to dominate in the West, which is unfortunate in many ways. But the West does have a somewhat subterranean but extremely brilliant contemplative lineage. And people know some of those names, from Thomas Merton to St. Teresa of Avila to St. John of the Cross to Meister Eckhart and so on. But as the contemplative teachers, East or West, of course they had a little bit of hesitation about making some of these transformative practices and some of these teachings available to just anybody. And, you know, Americans can be pretty goofy. You know, we just sort of wander in and say, hey, give me the teaching. I want it to last 3 seconds, like my microwave, and I don't want to do all this practice shit. So, and the teachers are kind of reluctant. But over the years, basically, there were a large number of Americans that demonstrated their sincerity, demonstrated the fact that they really, really were capable of holding these. And so the teachings, the highest teachings available, including up to Vedanta and Dzogchen in Buddhism, became available. And then what was important is, as I said, was you go through these 20,000 transformative practices. You want to get the ones that have some sort of evidence that they work, that have been tested by our own teachers, and then can be worded and phrased in a way that really is crystal clear. And that's very important because we are learning more and more and more, and this is also something that came as kind of a surprise to us. But once you have your spiritual experience, and it can even be an ongoing, permanent realization, nonetheless, you're going to interpret that experience in terms of whatever framework you have. You're going to explain it somehow. So if you have a dream, for example, and it's a luminous, blazing white light, and you just feel bathed with complete safety and protection and love, and at one point you might become one with that light then, so that you can say, I am the light of the world. I am that fundamental awareness. Now, as you come out and somebody of the state and somebody says, tell me about it, you're going to start interpreting it. You're going to tell them about it based on whatever it is you have, whatever your repertoire of explanatory concepts is. And if it's not a good explanation, it actually hurts the experience. The experience will start to fade because you can't hold it. You don't have a framework that will hold that experience. So, of course, the experience itself is free of concepts, free of boundaries, free of limitations. But it's radically unqualifiable, consciousness or radically unqualifiable Godhead or radically unqualifiable Nirguna Brahman, whatever you want to call it, when you come out of that sense of absolute infinite freedom and absolute fullness, or even if you have an ongoing awareness of it, you still have to fit it in with your relative self. And so you have an infinite self and you have a relative self. And the shocking thing we learned is that the relative self better have a good framework or the infinite self will disappear. There's nothing to hold it. There's nothing to keep it around. So clarity of instruction and clarity of the actual map we use, the integral map, both of those were very, very important because, again, otherwise it doesn't stick. You can work and work and work, and it won't stick. It slides off you.
Well, let's talk about the 4 modules now.
Sure.
Do you have a preference for which one we start with?
Well, why don't? Because we want to emphasize both the familiarity, because I think a lot of people will be aware of the modules. We mentioned they're obviously common names, many of them, body, mind, spirit, and shadow. But if it was just those 4, it wouldn't be all that new. So perhaps we could use the body as a way to show that we are really going into the core of the esoteric teachings and making sure that there's at least some practice from each of those core aspects. And the easiest way to see that is to realize that when we say the body module, we point out that people have 3 bodies, not just one. They have a gross body, which is the physical body you can see in the waking state, and the physical body that you might run with or jog with or make love with or lift weight with. And then there's a subtle body. And that's the body, the easiest way to talk about that, that's the body you have in the dream state. And the traditions maintain that the dream state of consciousness is supported by a subtle body. You actually have a subtle energetic body. And then we go into deep formless sleep, or alternatively into profound states of meditation, of formless, unmanifest absorption. You have a causal body. And so what we do is we've, again, looked at all of the exercises that claim to work to help people awaken and strengthen these 3 bodies. We only pick the ones that work the best, so these are best practices again. And again, they also can be, they're scalable and customizable and modular, so you can sort of fit it to your lifestyle. But there are fundamentally 3 simple kinds of practices that you want to do to make sure that all 3 of these bodies are in good shape and are awakened.
So this is a way into the spirit, an overlap, you could say, with the spirit module, because when you get into the subtle and causal bodies, you're really getting into the spiritual realm. Not that the physical isn't the spiritual realm, too, for that matter, it is. But
that's right.
It's
the densest of the spiritual realms, but it's still a manifestation of spirit. And one of the things that we do, for example, we've been talking about weightlifting, and I don't want to overplay that because, again, people in the physical module can use any number of things. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be getting hernias here, either physical hernias or metaphysical hernias.
You don't have to be preparing for the strongman competition.
That's right. So the gross physical body is what it sounds like, and I gave a brief explanation of that. And it's sort of what is lifting the weights. But while you're lifting the weights, there's a whole subtle body of bioenergy and feeling awareness and focus and directionality and intention. And when you basically then also feel your direct intention as you're lifting these weights, you're actually enlivening that entire subtle body, which incidentally includes all those acupuncture meridians that are so extraordinarily important in health, and is touching in with Kundalini energy. There's this fundamental, profound energy that accompanies spiritual states, as you were saying. And then by the time you get to the causal body, which is the body that you have in deep, formless, infinite consciousness, then the causal body itself is when you feel to infinity. And that means basically we have practices for that. How can you feel to infinity, and what does that mean? And how can you awaken the ever-present self, the real self, the pure consciousness or pure witness that is correlated with the causal body. And that's an exercise we have. And, of course, that ties in with big mind, and so you're back in the spirit, working with spirit as well, because they're all interconnected.
One of the things that when I was looking into this kit, one of the things I went for the spirit module first.
Yeah.
And then I looked at the mind module, which was also impressive, and the shadow module. The last one I looked at was a body module. Now I exercise every day, and I've almost always exercised. And so when I went to listen to the DVD about focused intensity training, which was centered around weightlifting, I was going to just listening to it because, I told you I'd go through the whole thing and look at it and so on.
Right.
And as I started to listen to that, I went, wow, this is really amazing because Sean Phillips has found a way to take weightlifting and, as you described, exercise all those bodies, make it into a meditation, and you could do the same thing. You don't have to do it with weightlifting. You could do it with Pilates. You could do it with walking. You could do it with jogging. Any kind of physical. You could add what he has done for this focused intensity training. But I was blown away when I listened. In fact, I think other than Big Mind, I've listened to that DVD more times than any of the others.
Yeah, I think that's a fine way to view it, and a really good explanation. And you're also pointing up a very important fact, which is different people will find different modules resonate with them more. And you certainly picked two of my favorites. And the body one really is extraordinary because once you've learned how to awaken all three bodies, then, like you say, you can use it in anything, and you can use it in any form of exercise. But something we'll talk about later, we have auxiliary modules. These are other modules. Once you work on the I, because the body, mind, spirit, and shadow is working mostly on the self. But then we have modules when we work with we, or relationships, and then modules where we actually work with the world itself. I, we, and it, or the good, the true, and the beautiful, or art, morals, and science. These are the three big domains that we want to touch in on. And right now we're primarily talking about self, because that's the place where you start, and that's why it's called the starter kit. But you will use all of these in your work, in your relationship, in your play, and so on. And again, not in the heavy metaphysical lifting weights thing, but out of the inherent joy and happiness is just awakened by doing this. It's not hard work. It's fun once you get these things awakened. And the three bodies is a really good place to start. And once you have the three bodies awakened, you can also make love with all three bodies. And that's where it gets really interesting. That's tantric sexuality. But you can make love with the gross body. You can make love with the subtle body. You can be making love with the causal body, or better, all three bodies are engaged in the act of lovemaking.
And a lot of people's ears
perked up. That's an awakened experience. Give it a try, as I know you have.
Yes, well, I remember years ago finding out what happened when you listened to Holosync while you made love. It's pretty far out if you haven't tried it, Ken.
Let me just mention, because what we have, the mental framework in the mind module, what the mind module primarily is indeed this framework that helps you to hold all of these things and see how they fit together. It's a very simple framework. People love it. It's called AQUAL, for all quadrants, all levels. But that's just sort of some tech terms relating to a very simple framework. But what you see is that it would actually find a place for when you're doing holosync, you're actually doing beta, alpha, theta, and delta inductions. And those brain states correlate with waking, dreaming, deep sleep, or gross, subtle, and causal bodies interiorly. So we can almost predict from this framework that using holosync would give you an experience of all three bodies, because it's awakening the corresponding brain states. And you know that makes sense, because that's what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the mind module is really kind of giving people a cognitive framework for the whole thing. And I know one of the things that you've taught for quite a while is how fundamental the cognitive line is.
Yeah.
in development. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and we might have to be careful here because cognitive has probably gotten one of the most, it's one of the dirtiest words out there for a lot of people engaged in transformative work or spiritual work, because they want to put a lot of emphasis on feelings and try to transcend thought to get into wider ranges of awareness. And in a certain sense, that's true, but it's really a misunderstanding of what the larger meaning of cognitive is. And cognitive itself is not defined as just abstract linear logic. Developmental psychologists define cognitive as capacity for taking perspectives, because cognitive means consciousness. So you just forget cognitive and use consciousness, and instead of abstract logic, it's capacity to take perspectives. And what we find across the board in terms of development is that people's development in their multiple intelligences, and most people know Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences notion, which is we have a musical intelligence and a mathematical intelligence and a physical or kinesthetic intelligence and interpersonal intelligence and so on. Well, those develop through levels or waves or stages too, like almost anything in nature. And the easiest way to summarize the way they grow is they grow from being able to take only a first-person perspective, so that's egocentric, to being able to take a second-person perspective. Second person is the pronouns you, for example. The person being spoken to is second person. So you expand to ethnocentric, and then as you continue to grow, you expand to third person or world-centric. So moving from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric, that's what cognitive is all about. And if you are not developing your capacity to take perspectives, then your spiritual experience will be locked into a lower perspective. And so if somebody, for example, is only at an egocentric level of development, and they have this experience of blazing white light, I'm just using that as one sort of exaggerated example,
right.
But blazing white light and an experience of universal love and so on, they'll experience it as if I am the only one that has this. Only I am Jesus. Everybody else is not. And that frankly, that gets on borderline schizophrenic states if development isn't enough to carry these things. If you get to an ethnocentric stage and you have this experience, then you'll say, wow, this is a fantastic experience. There's a savior, or there's love, there's light, but it applies only to a chosen people. And the Jews are not the only ones to do that. Fundamentalists everywhere do that. Southern Baptists think that if you don't accept Jesus as your personal savior, you are going to fry in hell. That's what happens if you're only at an ethnocentric level of consciousness or cognition. So you want to continue to use practices, which we include here, to help take perspectives and get a world-centric perspective. So when you have these experiences, whether it's a big mind or Godhead or Tao or Brahman, or just increased mastery of some task that you're working on for work or athletics, when that experience happens, you will be able to hold it in a world-centric space. Because if you can't, again, it will slide away. It will slide down to one of these lower interpretations, because you will interpret your state experience according to the stage that you're at.
So wouldn't you say that when we talk about integral life practice, what we're doing is practicing taking more perspectives and taking more inclusive perspectives? So that, I mean, it's really that as you go do these things, you're practicing, and the more you practice, the better you get at it.
It's true. And taking the role of other, of seeing through others' eyes, and every time you do that, you actually transcend your own self. So there's a payoff, because every time you transcend your own smaller self, you find a bigger self. And the ultimate goal, of course, is big self or big mind or true self or true condition.
Yeah, include everything.
It includes everything, all sentient beings. You are literally one with all manifestation. And that's a direct, profound experience in this moment. But you don't want to come out of that experience of, I am one with everything that's arising, moment to moment. And that's a complete freedom because I'm not attached to anything in particular, and it's also a complete fullness because there's now nothing outside of me. I am everything that is arising, and so I cannot possibly feel lack or want. Now, that is an extraordinarily awakened type of experience. But if you're not developed in other ways, you're going to interpret it in lower dimensions, at lower levels than it can be. And you just basically are trashing this extraordinary experience. You won't be able to hold it.
So the mind module, then, in the Integral Life Praxis Kit is designed to give you that framework so that you can hold more, so that you can take more perspectives, so that, and this as we've said with the other things, this accelerates your progress in the other modules
significantly. So much so, I've seen even teachers like Andrew Cohen, for example, who, like many teachers, is a big fan of the framework, uses it himself, and completely endorses it. He's to the point where he says the interpretation that you have of a spiritual experience is more important than the spiritual experience.
Absolutely.
It just is that important, yeah.
Yeah.
So we want to hold on to that. And so basically that's, in a sense, you can think of the mind module as a catcher's mitt for somebody's going to pitch this baseball at you. And the mind module is the catcher's mitt, the framework that you'll be able to catch it in. So if you don't have a very big catcher's mitt, you're going to have a hard time catching those fastballs that Spirit's throwing at you. And this is what a catcher's mitt, this is what the mind module does. It's the catcher's mitt for God.
All right, let's move on to the Spirit module and talk a little bit about that. We've talked about it a little bit, but mention some of the things that people will find in that module.
Sure, and again, most of these, we're of course, talking about them now because, this is what it is, the teleseminar, and we're trying to give information so people can make up their minds and decide if they want to try this. But most of these modules are experiential, and I do want to emphasize that they're actual practices that you do. But we do have in the kit, we have about a 100-page small book explaining all the details for people that want that. So there is a theoretical orientation. But the modules themselves are largely experiential. But because we are discussing it and kind of explaining it, let me give one quick example in the Spirit module, because we've already used Big Mind and explained that is an extremely effective technique, which two of the DVDs cover entirely, and people will be able to have that experience and know exactly what we're talking about. But the other one I want to mention is what we call the 1, 2, 3 of God, or the 1, 2, 3 of Spirit. And it's just a way of showing how the integral approach, because it includes so many approaches that are valid, that it really stops a whole lot of argumentation that's going on in people that don't see a more integral approach. And here's the quick example. What we mean by the 1, 2, 3 of Spirit is that Spirit, like anything else, can be looked at in first person, in second person perspective, and in third person. And we maintain all of those are correct. All of those give you a different aspect, legitimate aspect of Spirit.
They're just different perspectives.
A different perspective.
That's all they are.
And it's a real part of Spirit. But as I give examples of them, you'll see how people are fighting over mine's right and the others are all wrong. And you'll start to see there's a lovely truth to all three of them. And so we, of course, include practices for all three of them. But we'll start with third person, and let me remind people that are not up on their English lit that first person means the person who is speaking, and second person means the person being spoken to, and third person is the thing or person being spoken about. So we use the pronouns I, you, we, and it. The second person is really you, but we sometimes combine that with we, because I and you is a we. So we sometimes say I, we, and it for first, second, and third person. A third person description of Spirit just means an objective view, and viewing Spirit as something that is objective, much like, for example, the Great Web of Life. The great web of life is a third-person concept and also can be considered spirit in its own third person. And the great web of life is a very common view of spirit, and particularly is used with systems theory. Friedrich Capra made that approach and even wrote a book called The Great Web of Life. And it's very popular with ecologists and so on. And we think there's a lot of truth to it. That's the third-person approach. The second-person approach, though, is take a third-person approach. Start with that. Maybe an example would be sitting on the edge of the Grand Canyon and just looking at the Grand Canyon, having your breath taken away. That's seeing spirit in third person. Now, imagine that the intelligence that created the Grand Canyon, and you don't have to think of this in intelligent design terms or in Christian terms, just as an intelligent being, not necessarily a person, but something that you could actually talk to almost or commune with. And that's spirit in second person. And, of course, in many cases, it's a great thou. And many of the, of course, theistic traditions, that's their view of spirit, is a great second person.
So devotion would be second person.
What would?
Devotion.
Yes, that's correct. And
Bhakti.
thank you. That's we call cosmic contemplation the practice in third person, and that's like sitting on the edge of the Grand Canyon and just contemplating the mystery and beauty and exquisiteness of the cosmic creation. And then in second person, it is devotion, gratitude. Also, though, much like, let's say, when Donald was doing his conversations with God, that's a classic second person kind of way of thinking about God. And that's fine. We say that's great. You can actually sit down, imagine one of the exercises, imagine that experience of sitting in a chair right in front of you. Now, what do you want to say to it? But you can also just picture it as something that you're resonating with. You can feel a living presence vibrating. And that's spirit in second person. And then spirit in first person, of course, is your own pure awareness. And Ramana Maharshi had a wonderful term for the witness or for Godhead. He called it I-I, because it's the awareness of the I. It's the I that's aware of the I, the witness in you right now that is watching everything arising moment to moment. And I'll give you just a very brief 30-second pointing out instruction on that. We can sort of anchor it, and that is that if you just relax your mind and relax your body and just notice that there are some sort of objects floating in your visual field in the environment. Clouds might be floating through the sky. It might be raining. Children might be playing. There are simply objects moving in your awareness in the physical world, including then in your own body. There are sensations arising. There are twitches or twinge, warmth, emotions could be arising, fear, delight, happiness. These just arise in awareness. Stay a minute and go. And the same with thoughts. Thoughts are arising. You don't know where from. You're not in control of where they come from. They just arise. They stay a minute. Images pass and basically disappear. And so I often say that objects arise in your awareness, torture you a bit, and then move on. But the interesting thing is that there's a witness of all of that. There is something in me, something in you, that is hearing all of these words, seeing all of these sights, listening to all of these sounds, but is not any of those. So the meditation is things like, I have thoughts, but I am not those thoughts. I have sensations, but I am not those sensations. I have feelings, but I am not those feelings. Who am I? Now, that is God in first person. The answer to that question, who am I, if you go far enough back to pure subjectivity, the answer is God, spirit. So spirit is looking through your eyes, and spirit is talking with your lips, and spirit is moving your limbs. So that's God in first person, and we have exercises for that. One of them, of course, is the exercise for big mind. So you can come into this from a tradition of faith and being used to approaching spirit in second person, and that's fine. You can come into this as maybe more a scientist, or systems theorist and approach spirit as just the great cosmos itself. Or you can approach spirit as this very pure I-ness, this I-amness that was before your parents were born, and this I-amness that you are before Moses was, I am.
And there's kind of a cross-training just within that module, because as you experience yourself in each of these, from each of these three perspectives, they all influence each other and support each other, and your ability to experience spirit in all of these ways grows.
Exactly, and not argue between them, and that's we constantly get when we're working with an integral approach is people that want to just pick just one and defend it to the death. But there are great truths in the others as well, and integrating them will actually, again, accelerate your growth massively, because all of a sudden all of your oars are in the water and they're all rowing in the same direction, and all of a sudden you get traction.
Well, and the interesting thing too is that what I have found is that when you are pretty well established in one of those, because you've you're familiar with it, you've done it a lot, the big ahas really are from going into the other two.
I think so.
What you haven't been, the perspectives you haven't been taking are the ones where the big shifts are.
It was the biggest probably when we first started introducing this, even for other teachers. In other words, teachers of a practice, perhaps Zen, meditation, who had not really, let's put it this way, probably around age 10, 11, 12, the whole mythic approach to religion and dogmatic fundamentalist approach just didn't make sense. And the old white-haired gentleman in the sky and all that say, no, thank you. And so they left and pursued first-person approaches. But when they came back, realized that these second-person approaches can go much deeper than just that mere mythic dogma, that it really can be something like, let's say, Martin Buber, the whole, every time you're in a pure relationship with an other that you consider as a thou, God is present. So there are very, very profound ways to work with spirit in second person. And you're exactly right. If you sort of maybe lost track of that or didn't know some of the deeper aspects of the other ways, and you just practiced one, it is a revelation to go back and forth between them and cross-train them.
Absolutely.
Because it's almost very healing.
Yes,
actually.
Yes. And which kind of brings us to, though we could talk about this forever, we should probably mush on to the shadow module so we can get everything finished here. And, in some ways, the shadow module is the toughest one for a lot of people.
It's the toughest, and what we found is I actually think that along with Big Mind, the 3-2-1 process is the one that has actually taken the most amount of stuff and condensed it into the briefest amount of very effective work.
Yes.
And what this is it's basically tied into most of the depth psychologies in the West, whether it's anything from Freud to Gestalt. And the idea, to put it briefly, is that if there's some aspect of yourself that you are out of touch with or you're not comfortable with, now it could be a positive trait, incidentally, as well as a negative trait. But for negative ones, it might be you have trouble with anger, or you have trouble around sexuality, you have trouble with your own power drives, your own fear, anger, aggression, and so on. And the most common defense when you have some aspect that you're not comfortable with is you project it. And you project it onto usually other people, although you can project it onto actually parts of your own body, but you can project it onto other people, and then you think they possess this horrid trait, but you are remarkably free of it. And we all know how that works in ourselves and in others. And so we found a very effective process that we just call 3-2-1. And it, again, works with third, second, and first person. And the way you do this, and this is terribly brief, but I think people will get the idea, because it's a simple practice you can do really for just a few minutes each day, but it will really keep you in touch with your shadow elements. One is when you wake up in the morning, review any dreams you had, and try to find something that was most energetic, that moved you the most. It could maybe have frightened you the most, Or it could be something that you lusted after the most, some real positive or real negative. Maybe it's a monster that's trying to eat you. So the idea is now, and you feel fear. So you get up and you just lie in bed and just review it in your mind, and you face the monster is the first thing. So it's a third person now because it's over there and you're talking about it. When you face it, it becomes second person because now you're talking to it. So you sit the monster down in the chair across from you, and you say, what do you want? And you just enter into a dialogue, and then you play the role of the monster. You then actually put yourself in the monster's seat, in its shoes, and talk as the monster. It often says things like, I want to kill you, I want to eat you. It can be very oral, very primitive stuff. And you just go back then and talk as yourself, and then you talk as the monster, and that's the whole second-person phase. And you keep doing that basically with awareness. And if you've done Big Mind, incidentally, you can do this in Big Mind, and it's unbelievable, the incredible effectiveness when you combine them. Again, cross-training. But you finally end up in first person. You are identified. You are the monster. That is your energy. And the remarkable thing that happens is that when you re-identify with these negative energies, they almost always turn into positive capacities and stuff that you need. And so it could be a bit of drive. It could be a bit of aggression in a positive sense. Aggression means to move toward. Hatred is to move against. Aggression just means in a positive sense. So you're reclaiming potentials that you had actually projected into shadow elements. And here's where it ties in with stuff like meditation. First of all, meditation, we know this now after 30 years of very careful watching, meditation doesn't get at shadow elements very well on its own. It just doesn't. And Tibetan Buddhism, for example, if you see the monster in your dream and you feel fear, Tibetan Buddhism will have you work with that fear and try to transmute it. The problem is that fear is an inauthentic emotion. You have actually projected the monster, and if you play the monster, what you feel as the monster is rage. Rage is the authentic emotion. So once you take back rage, then you can transmute it using these other techniques. But until then, you're not. So the traditions are not very good at getting at shadow elements. So we have you basically identify whatever the really positive or negative charge was as soon as you wake up from a dream, and then go ahead and do the 3-2-1 process on it. It'll often take a minute or two. Obviously, if it's very deep, it might take more time, and you want to slow down and work with it, maybe in an entire session. But then also at the end of the day, you take the person, it might be your boss, that most annoyed you that day, and then you sit them down, and then you identify with them, and then you take back that projection that you flipped out on them. And it might be, some people get confused, there might be a terrorist out there, and you projected a negative onto that terrorist. And that's fine. The terrorist, in itself could be a problem, but now you've got two terrorists.
Yes.
And that'll cripple you. So it actually takes away your energy to be able to meditate well, to be able to use your body well, to be able to use your mind well. And whether you're using your mind, at work or at any of the values orientation, mind is obviously a lead module because that's the one you're exercising in your profession and in the judgments you make, and most importantly, the framework you have of body, mind, spirit, shadow. That's self, and we exercise body, mind, spirit, shadow in self, in culture, and in nature. And those are fundamental modules as well, in addition to the auxiliary ones that we have if you want to use those. But again, can be done very quickly. 1-minute modules just to keep you in touch with what is the important aspect of having all of these cylinders firing, so all of your system is working.
So this is the way for people who are constantly having bad feelings because other people are bothering them and this sort of thing. This is really gets to the source of that and gets rid of that. I have always said that people do not have to go through their whole life living like that. And this is a very simple way to get past that. And the process in the kit is led on the DVD by Diane Hamilton, who is one of the top Buddhist teachers in the world, really, I think, and works a lot with Genpo Roshi. She's one of the senseis who works under Genpo, and it's a really amazing DVD. Very powerful stuff.
And we, again, the 3-2-1 process is, in a sense, the default process. It's the one that we think is the best, and we include it there in case you don't have one. But if you're already doing some sort of work, you might be doing art therapy or any just sort of standard cognitive therapy or anything like that, that's fine. You already have a shadow practice. You can do the 3-2-1 or not under those circumstances. We recommend, of course, you certainly look at it. For those who aren't doing anything, then we highly recommend they do something like this process. And the 3-2-1 is, again, just a very, very simple introduction. The remarkable thing is how effective it is in getting at some really, really deep stuff. But, of course, if you then choose, if you have some really serious problems and you choose to perhaps get into therapy, that's fine. And we, of course, recommend you work with an integral therapist. But you can go into any of these modules as deeply as you want to. But you can also just do, 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, and keep them really firing at a level that's appropriate for you. But again, you can go into them as much as you want to in detail as well.
Yeah, I mean, on the days when you don't have enough time, these 1-minute modules mean that you kind of keep your hand in. And
exactly.
And so it's not like you can have a dry spell or for months you don't do something and then suddenly you're going back into it. Anybody can do 1 minute a day of these, at least to keep things going.
Exactly, and it's just what you say. It's just to kind of keep in touch. They're very effective, and in a sense, it's a classic American thing. I mean, we really are trying to distill and condense into the most effective thing, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as it actually works, and as long as you also keep open the fact that yes, you can do the 1-minute modules, and yes, you can do a whole. You can spend 5 minutes on each of these modules each day and do a really good integral practice in maybe 15 minutes. But if you want to really dig down into something like Big Mind, if you decide you want to study Big Mind, or we do contemplative Christianity with Father Thomas Keating, we do integral Jewish meditation with Rabbi Zalman, we do integral Vedanta with Swami Durgananda, Sally Kempton, and so on. Well, with Genpo, you can spend 5 years going into Big Mind process. So any of these, you can do the Sean Phillips thing and work on your physical body for 5 or 10 years and spend an hour a day on it. But you can spend really 5 to 10 minutes on these, get the essentials out of them, and then most importantly, that will let your actual transformation grow and not regress. It sticks when you cross-train and when you have a good framework to hold it.
The thing I found, too, is that when people start off doing a small amount of practice, and it's effective practice, they get benefits, they get results, and that causes them to want to do more of it. And so very naturally, people start off with something minimal, and pretty soon they're doing much more spiritual practice than they ever thought that they would want to do, and getting huge benefits, and they find that they integrate it into their day so that as they're going about their day, their whole day really becomes spiritual practice.
All of that's really well put. I mean, I could use every sentence you said on that, and I think it's exactly right. What happens often is that people will pick it up, sometimes out of curiosity, and maybe they'll put on one of the, what is 3 bodies? I didn't know I had 3 bodies. They'll put the 3-body DVD on, and all of a sudden they're kind of blown away by it. They get a real hit of infinity, that feeling of actually relaxing to infinity and getting in touch with that. And, well, that's fun. Then they try the Big Mind, and all of a sudden they're literally in touch with Buddha mind in about 1.5 hours. Well, that's fun.
That's fun, too.
And all of a sudden the fun stuff is what keeps them going. And then if they hit a stretch where they actually have to do some work, maybe a little bit of shadow work, maybe really get down and work hard on weightlifting for a particular problem or doing rolfing or something like that, it'll carry them over because fundamentally the program radiates a joy and a happiness, getting in touch with these fundamental sources of joy and radiance. And so you're exactly right. People pick it up like that, and then they find that they can do more than they thought they ever could, let alone wanted to.
Okay, we're getting out of time here, Ken. So let's tell people how they can get this kit. The kit is regularly $249, but anybody that's listening to this can, with the URL that we're going to give you, get it for $199.
Yep.
And along with that, they also we're giving them a free audio.
Yep.
And it's you talking about something from your latest book, Integral Spirituality. Now let's see if I can remember what it is, or maybe you remember and you can say.
Yeah, it's the chapter on Integral Life ILP practice and exactly what that is, and it's a really good summary and overview in a very short amount of time, and in what spiritual practice is and what personal practice is. And people find that very interesting. And so we thought that's something that we just make available this one time for the good folks who are listening now. And so that's what that is.
Yeah, and then we also told people that just for being on this call, that they would also get something. So when I give this URL at the bottom of the page, there's a PDF that you can get that are the first 2 chapters from your new book, as of yet unpublished, about integral life practice. So people are going to be experts at this from all this stuff. The other thing that people should know is that you've also built into this some follow-up and support, because people, when they do this stuff, they invariably have questions. They wonder if they're doing it right. They want a little help. So you have a set of follow-up support letters that people get periodically. How often do those go out?
That varies on their own progress.
I see. Okay, but there's a series of follow-up support letters that are designed to say, okay, here's what's likely to be happen, here's why it's happening, here's how to deal with it, here's how to get the most out of it. And then is there someone they can call for help too? Is that part of it?
Yes, there is, and that'll be part of the package that starts unfolding for them when they get these emails. And we have the staff not only that help develop this, but that help write that handbook that they're getting the first 2 chapters on, including people like Terry Patton. Of course, Terry is very well known for creating tools for wellness, and he's one of our main teachers in integral life practice. And he, like Diane Hamilton, are really amazing. Diane Hamilton is another teacher. So all of these are available, and there's a whole network of follow-up. Because it's not just for this kit. Although, again, if this is what you want to do, and that's the only way you want to do, that's fine. But there's a whole network of things that we've done at Integral Institute, as you know. And that would have to be at least mentioned because it's tied in with this. We have Integral University, and right now we have 2 fully accredited graduate degree programs, and people can find out about that. We have Integral Naked, which is a weekly talk show about these items, but we have people on this talk show that appear no place else. Larry Wachowski, who did The Matrix, gave one and only one interview on the meaning of the Matrix, and he did that with me on the Integral Naked. Michael Crichton's on it. Tony Robbins is on it. All of the spiritual teachers we mentioned. So there's a lot of discussion of the material there. If you're more academically inclined, we have it's called an AQUIL journal. It's the professional journal, and we have over 19 disciplines where people literally can see how to create integral art, integral history, integral economics, integral politics, integral education, and so on. So there's a whole life support network, if you will, if people want to find community that is also doing this and doing this with all these other areas that you can work in. So that part is very exciting.
So this kit, though, is kind of the way in. And, I mean, the basis of all of this to begin with is your own practice. And so we really want to encourage people, if you want to know the best practices and the best way to do them, put together by the best minds, really, literally, and this is often thrown around as a cliche, but in this case, it's really true. The best minds in the world. This is the place to start, and right now you can save $50 when you buy it. I hate to bring the crass financial stuff in, but it's true, and everybody loves saving $50. So,
$50.
You bet. So at any rate, all you have to do to get this is go to www.myilp.com/teleseminar. And that will get you the $50 discount. And also on that website, myilp.com/teleseminar, is the PDF that we said of the first couple chapters of your ILP book that you will be publishing at some time in the near future.
Yep.
And also, because I know there's a lot of people on this call who probably already have the kit.
Yep.
And if you already have the kit, there's also something on this page for you. So go there and take a look at it, and there's something for people that already have the kit. And if you get the kit, you can also get what we have there for the people that already have it. So this is just sort of blessings pouring down from heaven on everybody that's listening, because this is really, really amazing stuff. And Ken, I really want to thank you for spending your life pulling all these people together and integrating all this stuff, because you're just doing something absolutely amazing, and I'm really feel very grateful to be a small part of it. And anything else you want to say before we sign off about this?
I just appreciate that, and I obviously appreciate the work you've done as well. HoloSync, as you know, I've been very supportive of that. I think this is very breakthrough technology, and is one of the things that we recommend as well, as people try HoloSync with the Integral Life Practice Starter Kit, because the HoloSync is one of the many practices you can use in the spiritual module, and you only have to use one or two, but try Big Mind and HoloSync together if you want to get your brain melted and reformed.
Absolutely.
That is an extraordinarily powerful practice. So thanks to you for doing that and pursuing that, and also being willing, like you are now, to help other really good approaches get the word out. It's very generous of you, and we're all very appreciative of it. And it's always a pleasure working with you.
Well, we're all in the same boat together, so we might as well all row in the same direction.
There you go, pal.
So, well, anyway, Ken, thank you so much.
Okay,
it's been a pleasure. I hope people will immediately sprint to myilp.com/teleseminar and get this kit. And I certainly know that at Centerpoint, we would love to hear your feedback about this. We've already got I think close to 1,000 people that are Centerpoint people that are using this kit, and they're raving about it. And I know that you guys would like the feedback too. So everybody go get it. Let's all start practicing this stuff and make the world a better, more integral place.
You bet it. If you've got positive as well as negative criticisms, love to hear all of them. All feedback is wonderful, and we keep trying to change these things and make them better all the time. But this is intended to be and was set out to be basically the best practices of the best practices. So let us have feedback on it. We'll continue to make it just exactly that.
All right. Thanks, Ken, and everybody out there.
Thank you, buddy.
Thank you
Bye
all
now.
for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.